Hey everybody, welcome to BrickVault. Today is another LEGO Top 10 MOCs of the Week episode where I show you guys the coolest custom creations I happen to see people building in LEGO throughout this last week. Before I jump into the first one though, I'd like to make a very quick and special announcement on behalf of Nicola Stacci, a designer we work with. Currently, he is auctioning off his completed war rig from Mad Max Fury Road. He is the original designer of this model and all of the other Mad Max models we have up in the web store, and I think that would make it pretty safe to assume that this is the very first one of these models built that all the rest of the instructions are based on, which is actually pretty cool. All the proceeds of this auction will be donated to local public assistance in the form of PPE, such as face masks, and it's a rare opportunity for someone to get a completed LEGO model instead of ordering the parts and sourcing them yourselves. The very first link in the description below leads directly to the War Rig auction if that is something that you are interested in. And remember, there are links to absolutely everybody I talk about in the description below as well, plus a whole heck of a lot more that I just don't have time to talk about. I know there's some new people watching today because I enticed you with a Tiger King thumbnail. These are not in order from my favorite to least favorite, just 10 models I like, and let's jump right in. This first creation comes from the designer Caleb Saw, and it's called Thunder's Mansion. I believe this is the first time we've shown this designer's builds off, and there is a lot of fun detail to get lost in for this model. I'm slowly but surely noticing this is kind of a common theme now amongst builders that have all these fun and interesting sort of specialized pieces from sets over the years that maybe would be difficult to include in a spaceship model or difficult to include in some type of landscape piece. So instead we have this display room or a menagerie of sorts, where when you compile an interestingly colored headpiece, an oddly shaped bowl, a funny animal, most of which would kind of need a very specific set of circumstances, when they're all together, it really looks nice to have them kind of set up in a sort of fancy, luxurious museum setting. Caleb went out of his way to light some of the gas lamps, which is wonderful. We have this sort of dinosaur skull hanging from the ceiling, and I love that there's that clock right in the front of the mouth. I think that's a Peter Pan reference, even though it doesn't look like an alligator head or crocodile, I don't know. But yeah, I'm just sort of poring over every little corner of this model as I talk, because really it's hard to get lost in specifics. It feels very warm, the lighting is nice and inviting, and it's one of those pieces that you certainly wish was life-size so you could explore it a little bit for yourself. Moving on to a designer called Awesomeosaurus. This is the Lukan-class missile frigate. I believe the model here is digital, though the parts all look like they can exist in real life. We've got some wonderful micro-scale detailings. I appreciate the use of those hinge pieces. Maybe that piece in sand blue doesn't exist, but we have all those nice little lumps in the front that pop up from the deck. A clever bit of building makes up one of those radar dishes in the front, and the bright color highlights for the boats and some of the warhead tips pop especially well against the dark bluish gray as well as the sand blue. Would love to see what one of these ships looks like with a completed hull beneath it. It looks to be built in a pretty similar style to the Fletcher-class destroyer that my brother designed, but it is just full of fun, subtle, interesting micro-scale building techniques. Now here we go. This is what was in the thumbnail from the designer SuckMyBrick. The title of this piece is simply Tiger King. For the designer handle name, this is a pretty appropriate thing to put together. I don't know if you guys watched this documentary. I got mostly through it. I feel like I got most out of it what I wanted. And this particular LEGO designer is great at making kind of caricature faces. And though I can't say the face we're looking at here is necessarily recognizable, quote unquote, as to Joe Exotic, but there's definitely a lot of personality, energy, and flair. I like the use of one of those extra Lord of the Rings rings just underneath the eye to look like he's got an eyebrow piercing. And a lot of the weird and interesting building techniques can be found on the tiger's face. He looks extremely suspicious. Definitely my favorite part, honestly, is the tiger. We have the ever classic use of those lever pieces that are jammed into the grills, and 3 levels of different eyebrows for that tiger to really add as much emotion to that character face as possible. At first glance, it doesn't look like there's a lot of weird techniques used here, but in my personal opinion, I feel like there was just enough complexity in the building to capture just a fun and somewhat whimsical atmosphere. This is not a recommendation to watch the ever popular documentary, but instead to call attention to a wonderful design that has come, and now this is pretty much officially part of pop culture. Moving down, we've got a design from a builder called Snips. Makes sense when you see their profile picture as well, and the title of this build is Concept Study Vehicle 1, Menace to Society. I chose this model because we see something a little different here at what looks like could be a fig scale model, maybe slightly small, or maybe a fig scale Lotus perhaps, but just look at the weird building technique that we have for the wheel wells. It's simple. You basically have a couple of bars that run across the front and back, and a lot of those little bar clips that slowly arc around over the wheels, making up the wheel wells themselves. Along the same lines, we have a few different tubular barrel pieces that run just underneath the front of the windscreen, and it makes for a completely unique stylization for a minifig scale car that I simply have not seen before. At the end of the day, I chose to highlight this model and builder because so many people think that certain designs or approaches to designs that have been done a million times before cannot be approached in any possible new way. But if you take a look at the photo stream from this particular builder, you'll notice that they have been approaching the minifig scale car in a variety of different ways, and this right here is totally brand new. Not every brand new approach may be a home run winner in terms of aesthetics, but it's thinking outside the box like this that ultimately makes coming back to doing this video every week all that much more interesting. All right, now it is time to have some shameless fun with a wonderful Star Wars build. This is from CubeBrick, and the title is The Pit Cantina. In its completed form, we have a desert scape on top with a few characters and an excellently detailed sarlacc pit with lots of tan layers leading down into multiple levels of road teeth as well as tentacles. Of course, there's that funny little nod of Boba Fett escaping from the sarlacc pit, but let's take the whole thing off and check out the happenings on the inside. Am I led to believe that if you get eaten by the sarlacc pit, then you're inside the cantina, or maybe that's the entrance? I'm not totally sure, but it doesn't really matter. The fact is the details here are awesome. The characters hanging about are really fun and interesting. The actual Mandalorian is also inside the cantina. There's a band playing in the back. A very large, very clean and smooth bar is being operated by a Gungan, and what cantina would be complete without a dancing Twi'lek on a pole? Twi'lek? Doesn't matter. The colors are subtle, just a little bit of white, a little bit of dark red, mostly tans, and nothing about this model feels particularly fancy. And if you have an excess of Star Wars minifigures, this is probably one of the best uses, making a scene similar to something like this. Now, jumping right along from the designer Milan Sekiz, he's got a couple of large ones that came out recently. I'm taking a look at the secret well kept. There's something very satisfying in the simplicity of this nature build. We have very clear definitions between little walking paths, a stone walkway, lots of underbrush, a small garden, river, couple of trees, and then at the end a stone house. There's an excellent juxtaposition for all the different types of tans and browns that we have. The roof is extremely varied in color this way. Also the same thing when it comes to the table outside and the little doghouse. All the structures here seem relatively simple in their construction designs, aside from the curve of that stone house and perhaps the construction of the little stone and wooden bridge. And I also appreciate the use of all the loose 1x1 studs that makes up the water. You can see they built up some trans blue walls to keep all of those loose pieces in on either edge. And the only question I'm really left with here when looking at this model is, do Chihuahuas really look like the puppy versions of German Shepherds? I'm not so sure about that. And now moving on to a very interesting one from the designer Victor, we have Diogenes Trexler escaping the Korvonian worm. Kind of a long title, and I was looking up Diogenes Trexler. He's a character that's popped up in other LEGO MOCs before, but who knows, maybe he's from another sci-fi or fantasy universe that I've never heard of. That's the guy in the Speedo with the beard and the man bun. He's on the surfboard escaping the Korvonian worm, which looks very similar to like a dune worm or something from Tremors, except extremely blue. I love the combination of all those different 3x3 inverted dishes. And I have a feeling Diogenes has the ability to create a portal, and he is about to fly from what looks like underwater directly into somebody's bathroom. The design, quality, and detail for the worm itself look looks so great in this diorama for both the ocean, and the interior of the bathroom is highly detailed. I love the sink. Aside from that, the characters are fun, the humor is great. The whole thing is as complete as a fun little model can be. And somebody please tell me who Diogenes is. The only description I can find, or Diogenes Trexler I should say, is the only description. He is the most powerful wizard in the world. I kind of like the idea that a character exists within the LEGO custom building world and nowhere else, but if he does exist in some other fantasy universe, I would like to know what that is. So if you do know, please let me know in the comments below. Anyways, 10 out of 10 for Victor. This is such a fun one. And then from the designer vincentkiew, we have Por una Cabeza, Carlos Gardel, and in parentheses Tango. This is another great example of a model not necessarily needing incredibly complex build design details in order to be a wonderfully effective and awesome looking piece. We've got two different versions of dancers, both posed in the same move during the tango. Two are built up and clothed and presumably dancing in real life, while on the other side we have these kind of monochrome, almost muscular figures. The male figure looks like a completely white yet stripped down muscle version of a figure, and the female character almost looks like a skinless person that you would see sort of in a cross sections book. Either way, the energy of both of these dancers feels very real. The builds here are extremely simple, or at least decently simple, but that's almost kind of the intentional positive point here, because it really just forces you to look at the basic angles that these dancing figures have, and there's a lot of energy captured in them. Speaking of motion, or at least a moment frozen in time, from the builder jaapxaap, we have Hummingbird, and this is probably one of the only times you will ever see pins and half pin, half axle pieces ever used as detailing in a model. It just simply doesn't happen, but it's happened here, and it looks amazing. That makes up the feathers on the wings of the hummingbird. The snout is made from a wrench piece. I also like that the bit of the flower is also made from some hammers. You can also see wrenches making up the feet. I get tons of hummingbirds from right outside my window where I work, and I've never seen one quite as bright blue and purple, or quite as vibrant really, as the one we're looking at now. This is just speculation, but I have a feeling the Lego build of the hummingbird is probably just as delicate, if not more so, than the actual bird itself in real life. Guess what? We've jumped on to the last of the top 10 of the week. This is from the designer Bram. It is called A Street Corner in Nova Jorvik. This interesting cross-section focuses almost more on the street than it does on the actual corner building, which is already a unique approach, but I like that idea because it really forces you to focus on the flying cars that inhabit the streets at the base level. Clearly, the vehicle design is based on something that you might see from the 40s or 50s, yet of course they actually are hover cars, built in a similar way to how maybe that hover car looked in one of those Overwatch sets, especially that green truck. It looks like very based on that type of vehicle build, just done in a much more highly detailed manner. There's some street bikers that are flying around somewhere in the sewer beneath. On multiple levels, we've got a few different curvy, rounded windows. In fact, a lot of arching and curved areas just in general in the buildings. And you couldn't see it from the main picture, but from this other section, this is my favorite bit of building, this particular dark red one that we have from the very back. There's something about the old classic Americana style that works really well when mixing it with sci-fi fantasy, and this is probably one of the best examples I've seen all year. Anyways, there are a ton more details to get lost in, but I've already gone on quite a bit for this episode. Remember, if you wanted to check out that auction conducted by Nicola for the war rig, that is the first link in the description below. Tons more links after that, both to the designers I've talked about today and a lot of extra ones that I simply have not had time to go over. If you enjoy our content, you can always like or subscribe. Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time at BrickVault.